Buying a home can be super scary, even in an appreciating market that we've seen over the last 10 or so years. But think to buy in a market that we're looking at right now, with increasing inventory, with rising interest rates, with media headlines every single day talking about a crash. That's super scary. Not only because you're taking hard-earned money and probably making your largest purchase ever, but the idea of that housing value declining and you losing that money is something that no one wants to go through. And a lot of you were around during the last housing crash, which is the reason that you have the concerns that you have right now, because home values declined nearly 50% across the board, which puts fear out there. Anybody looking to buy a house now is thinking about that last time. And so in today's video, we're going to talk about the idea of not buying a house, when it's a good idea, when it's not a good idea. On top of that, we're going to debunk some of the myths, if you will, comparing the housing market now to the housing market back then, so that you have a solid foundation, some logical information that you can base your decision off of. Buying a home, in my opinion, should never be about trying to pick a bottom or a top in the price of that property. It comes down to whether or not it's the right time of your life to own a property. And we're going to talk about that here in just a minute. But before we do that, I want to ask a favor. If you'll hit that thumbs up, it helps the YouTube algorithm. It helps more people see the video. And it also helps me accomplish my goal of helping potential buyers out there understand how important real estate is in the long run, and how making that decision has less to do about the housing market and more to do about your life. Now, because I'm a real estate agent, everyone wants to say, well, Jeb, you're always going to say it's a great time to buy a home because I benefit. Well, yes and no. Understand that my audience here on YouTube, the large majority of people viewing my videos, are somewhere outside of my market area. So I don't benefit at all by people watching this video. You know, the goal with this channel has always been to educate and to help provide useful information for people wanting to buy a house or looking for information on when is a good time to buy a house. And that's the reason for this video. But at the same time, also understand it's not always a great time to buy real estate. And right now, we're coming into one of those times where you should be a little more hesitant as a buyer. You know, back in 2012, 2013, coming out of the last housing crash, that was a great time to be a home buyer because we had just come out of one of the biggest declines in history, which we're going to talk about here in just a minute. But now we're 10 years later, where the market has appreciated over 100% in many, many markets out there. And with the two most recent years of 15 to 20% gains in many markets out there, it's becoming more and more likely that you're going to see home prices moderate, decelerate, pull closer back to that trend line that we've seen over the last 50 years or so of 4.5% appreciation. So in order for home values to get back on track, we need home prices to move sideways, decline in some markets. But honestly, buying a home shouldn't be about that. It should be whether or not it's the right time of your life. Why? Because buying a home shouldn't be looked at as an investment. It's a great opportunity for generational wealth long term, but when making that upfront purchase, you shouldn't be thinking of that property as an investment and worrying about the value tomorrow. You should be thinking about the monthly payment. Can you afford to make that monthly payment month over month, even in a time where we're likely to see a recession over the next year, year and a half? As job layoffs happen, as the economy slows, are you still able to make that payment? Are you going to be in that property long term? Are you thinking of just buying it, looking to flip that property, buy something else? If that's the case, you should not be buying a home in this market. Whereas if you do have plans to buy a property, maybe get married, maybe have kids and raise a family or whatever it is that you're trying to do in that property, but you have a 7-10 year time horizon, 5+ years if you will, I would say owning real estate is a very, very good idea. And that time horizon, that longer term time horizon, allows you to withstand any bumps in the road that you're likely to see over the next couple of years as the housing market slows. But if you're a home buyer out there looking at the market thinking a crash is coming and you shouldn't buy because you think values are going to decline significantly and you're going to be able to buy a property for significantly less, and you're comparing it, to the last housing debacle, if you will, let's take a minute here and talk about the differences The differences in the last housing crash, if you will, the only one that most of us have ever seen, then you're thinking about it for the wrong reasons, in my opinion. But let's take a minute here and talk about then versus now, and then also some final thoughts on not buying a house now and potentially waiting versus getting into the market because it's the right time. So back then, leading into that last housing crash, we had a big housing boom, if you will. We had home builders building property, a lot of spec property, if you will. And at that time, we had somewhere around 12 and a half months of supply, which is a significant difference from where we stand today. It's somewhere around 2.5, 2.6 months of supply across the nation. On top of that, we had a decline in potential home buyers that would be prime buying age leading up into that 2005, 2006 era. What am I talking about? Well, if you go 33 years back and look at the number of births that was happening back at that time, we had a decline at that time. And then you go 33 years forward and you're thinking, Jeb, what does 33 years have to do with it? Well, 33 years is typically the prime buying age for most home buyers out there. And so if you go back from that time and you look forward 33 years, that takes you into that 2005, 2006 time period. Well, at that time, we had a huge boom in construction, like we talked about, but we had a decline in the number of buyers turning prime buying age. So there were less buyers coming into the market that would be home buyers during that period of time. So we had way more supply coming on the market than the market could actually handle. And at that time, we also had low buyer demand. Why? Because we had a credit issue out there. Many buyers out there couldn't get the credit to buy homes because of everything happening in the world. Well, you might say, well, Jeb, right now we also have low buyer demand. Well, the differences in that market versus this market is we had a lot of inventory back then in low buyer demand, which created a buyer's market, right? It was not good for sellers back then. Right now, we have a low supply of homes. As I mentioned, we're sitting around 2.5, 2.6 months of supply nationwide, and we also have low buyer demand. Yeah, demand has increased, but it's still significantly lower than the 3-year average leading up to the pandemic, which was still a seller's market. So right now, low inventory, low demand equals more of a balanced market versus what we saw back in 2006. Now, it's still a seller's market now, but it's way more balanced in favor of sellers in this environment than it was during the last housing crash. On top of that, we've talked about this before, many buyers back then put low to no money down, 100% financing, in some cases 110, 125%, which means you could actually borrow more on the home than you were buying than it was worth. Versus now, buyers are putting large down payments. How, you say? Because many of them have sold property and have a large amount of equity to upgrade into another property. But you might be asking, well, what about all the buyers out there that have FHA loans and put no money down? Well, those buyers are going to be more at risk in a market that declines. But at the same time, if you're buying it for the right reasons, you're comfortable with that payment, you have less to be concerned with because your payment is fixed. This is not a rent payment that your landlord can come in every single month and raise your rent. Your payment is going to be fixed for the long term. Versus back during the last crash, a lot of the loans were short-term adjustable rate mortgages, ARMs, 2 years, 3-year fixed loans, many of them negatively amortized, which means that you weren't even paying all the interest in your monthly payment, so your balance was going up every single month. Now you might say, well, Jeb, people are starting to get ARM loans today. Yeah, they are, but these ARM loans are fixed for a longer term period, many of them 5, 7, 10-year adjustable rate mortgages. On top of that, buyers have to put down payments down, versus back then, there was no down payment required. On top of that, the average home buyer's credit score during the last housing crash was 681, versus today, the average credit score is 745. In addition, that time we had a lot of people pulling money out of their property doing cash out refinances, not only to buy toys, but they were also buying other property. It was a very speculative time. People were pulling money out to 100% financing in many cases. They take all the equity out of their property to buy another property, and sometimes another property to turn into a rental. And what happened was, as the market declined and pulled back and their loans started adjusting, they realized they couldn't afford these properties anymore. And so they just let them go, which added to the number of distressed sales. Now you do have people pulling money out of their property, but many of them aren't using it to buy property. They're using it to upgrade, to improve their current residence, which is adding potential value to their properties. And because of all of those cash out refinances, the amount of tappable equity at that time across the board was very, very low compared to now, where we just saw U.S. home equity hit $27.8 trillion. So there's a lot of equity in the system. In fact, 37% of people own their homes outright right now with no mortgage on them at all. Back then, 31%. So not a huge difference, but yeah, the number of people that own their homes free and clear now versus then has increased, which shows less of a chance of default in those cases. Yeah, if home prices pull back, some of that equity is going to get eaten up, but at the end of the day, even if home values pull back significantly, the large majority of people out there have a low fixed rate loan that's not going to go anywhere. On top of that, the lending standards today versus back then, significantly different. So I think it's pretty clear that, 2002 versus 2006, 2007, whatever year you want to reference, there's a noticeable difference in those markets. So the question is, should you buy now or should you wait? Now, as we talked about earlier in the video, buying now has some risk, right? The idea of home prices moving sideways, potentially pulling back. If you have a short-term time horizon, if you're looking to sell your property in a short period of time, you could end up being underwater on your mortgage if you don't put a large down payment. And that's a risk. So you should not be buying in this market if you're thinking of only owning 2 or 3 years. But I would also say that's true in almost any market. Even if we had seen prices move sideways for the last 5 to 6 years, I would still tell you having a shorter term time horizon has its risk. If you're someone that likes to move often, you don't really like to stay put, owning a house might not be in your best interest. But if you're someone looking to put down your roots, potentially, get married, build a family, whatever your reasons are, owning a home not only increases your odds of long-term generational wealth, it also provides stabilization. Stabilization in your community. It provides a foundation for kids to grow up. There's definitely benefits to owning real estate that have been proven long term with regards to how it affects your development growing up because of that stabilization it provides. So in short, don't buy a property right now if you're only buying it for short-term gains. If you listen to your cousin or your friend and heard how much they have gained over the last couple of years and you want a piece of that, you have FOMO, you shouldn't be buying a property. You also shouldn't be buying a property if you don't have money in the bank. After you put down the down payment, after you pay the closing cost, if you don't have 4-6 months minimum of reserves after buying that property, you probably should hold off. On top of that, you shouldn't be considering buying a property if you're sacrificing on all your non-negotiables. If you were originally thinking of buying a property that was, say, a 2-bedroom and all you can afford is a studio, and you're just sacrificing on what you want to get into real estate, I don't really feel like that's the best move, especially in an environment that we're in right now, because it might take you 5-7 years to be able to recoup potential cost on that property if the market does decline. So just understand, if you're a home buyer out there, there are things that you need to consider. But at the same time, don't go watching YouTube like me to get your answers. It should be a decision that you make because it's the right time of your life. But after watching this, you're still wondering, should you buy now? Should you wait? How are interest rates and all of that going to impact values going further? Do me a favor, check out this video here. I dive into that in more detail. But for now, I appreciate you taking the time to watch. Appreciate your support. Hope to see you again soon. Have a great day. Bye-bye.